Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Anita. We're so happy that you're joining us today for what is 10 years of Jane Austen birthday teas at Sacramento Public Library. And we're going to do it no matter what it takes and no matter how strange it is. So here we are all on Zoom. I hope you have a lovely cup. I have Darjeeling in mine, but I think Stephanie are we still doing a special tea? No, darn it. We had an idea for a special tea for people, but next year when we're all together again. My name is Rivka Sass, and I'm director of Sacramento Public Library and a huge Jane Austen fan. And so I'm very excited that we're able to do this today. And we're especially excited because Natalie Jenner, author of the New York Times bestseller and Goodreads favorite and many other accolades and awards, is here today in conversation with our own Stephanie Borelli. Those of you who are Austen fans probably joined her program series, back in 2009 now, How Ostentatious. And you've attended amazing programs that she has curated for our community through Sacramento Public Library. We really want to thank our bookseller partner, Face in a Book. You can purchase signed copies of the book. Natalie has very generously signed book plates, and they are available through our bookseller. And I hope you'll do that. You know, libraries are partners when it comes to selling books. We often are the ones who maybe introduce authors to the world, and then they go off and do amazing things. So help us do that with Natalie Jenner. She doesn't really need our help. The book is an amazing bestseller, and you'll probably hear more about that, but do that. I hope you all have a healthy, peaceful, joyous, socially distanced holiday season. Please stick with the library through it. We're still doing curbside. And Hanukkah, yes, Anita, and Kwanzaa and other seasonal holidays, including the solstice. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie Borelli, but do stick around this afternoon. There will be dancing, there will be wonderful conversation, and of course, hopefully you made yourself a cup of tea as well. So thank you again so much for joining Sacramento Public Library.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rivka, for that lovely introduction. As you all know, we're so excited. This was beyond what we could imagine for this year. Natalie Jenner saved us, and she knows a lot about saving people and saving situations, as clear from her book, The Jane Austen Society. She's really come through. 2020 has been quite a challenge, and a year of impossibilities and new possibilities that we never could have imagined. And so we're so lucky that Natalie's joining us from afar, and we're in Canada. But I think so many of you are all over the world, and North America and Europe. So, we've something about Jane Austen. She makes the world seem a little smaller. We have our own village, like Chawton. But Natalie has written an amazing book that has received many awards. It's been very successful, and I think it's been not successful only as a book, but as a story that continues to bring fans of Jane Austen together, both fictionally and in real life. I think that's one of the things that is so amazing about this, is that it's very human. It really represents the human experience of a Jane Austen reader. And So we're so fortunate that that you come offered to join us today. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. I mean, this is honestly, I've been looking forward to this for months, and Rivka emailed me and said, would you? And I just jumped all over it. I was like, this is the perfect thing to do leading into the holidays, capping off this incredible year in my life, and just connecting with people that love Jane Austen. Because if nothing else, this book, I think, shows how people can bond over books in general, but especially the fandom of Jane Austen. And let me tell you, as an author, there's nothing better than having Austenites as readers of your book and as people that like your writing, because they are truly the most wonderful people. And so I'm triply blessed in this regard. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, you know, we often find ourselves here talking about Jane Austen in December. Some people kick off their December festivities by honoring Jane Austen because her birthday is December 16th. So just 3 days from now. And so it is a lovely time of year. I mean, those of you who have read into her life know that she was born on a very, very cold day in December. And from that very cold day, she's brought warmth into the lives of millions for hundreds of years. I mean, it's just incredible. So, so it's lovely to be here to honor her on her birthday and to have you here to help us do that. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So would you like to get started maybe? Shall we raise our glasses?
Yeah, I went all out and I brought champagne. So not tea, because it's dinner hour where I am on the East
there
Coast
you
of
go.
Canada. I have an excuse. It's after 5 officially. It's 5.
I think it's a lovely day to have champagne.
So if everybody actually who's watching, because I think we're all starved for community right now. So whatever you can put in your hand and raise up in honor of Jane right now would be so greatly appreciated. And it would make me feel a little less alone. So let us all raise our glasses and our hearts in celebration of a very special day, December 16th, which this year will be the 245th birthday of Jane Austen, whose all too brief but incredibly productive life shows us all how to maintain faith in our own unique talents, how to aim high with those same talents while always striving to lift others up as well, and how to enjoy and persevere with our talents and our art, even in the face of illness, grief, and despair. For all that she has given us and continues to give us with each passing year, let us all wish together, happy birthday, Jane.
Happy birthday, Jane. That's very lovely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I just had the pleasure of rereading your book. I wanted everything to be fresh, and I'm so glad I did, because tucked away at the very end, chapter 29, I loved this. You summed up, because it's such an interesting book, and I just love how you summed this up yourself. Chapter 29, you say, the society itself sounded like a band of misfits and negligible expertise and no head for business. A country doctor, an old maid, a schoolmarm, a bachelor farmer, a fay auctioneer, a conflict-averse solicitor, a scullery maid, and one Hollywood movie star. What a pack. Now, I don't know if maybe we prefer to keep spoilers at bay, because what I'm really hoping is that we have people among us who have read this book once or twice, or people who have yet to read this book and are looking forward to it. So we don't want to give anything away, I think. But I think it's fair, because these are our characters and we meet them very early on. So I'm giving nothing away. But what inspired you to write this book with this band of characters?
It's interesting because I did not know very much when I sat down to write this story. I had been coping with a difficult medical crisis for my husband, and I had found, as I'm sure many people are this horrible year, I was finding solace and comfort from returning to Jane Austen. I'd loved reading her books. Every year I would read a different one since I was about 9 years old. And I did a small trip to England on my own to go to the village of Chawton, where she had worked on these books as part of coping with my husband's medical, diagnosis. And he took a golfing trip to Augusta, Georgia with the guys, and we did trips together. But at some point I was like, I want to go do this one little thing. And when I came back, I continued to read about Jane Austen. And then my husband was put on an experimental drug regime for his incurable form of lung disease, which is called IPF. And he started to stabilize, and we started to have hope again. And I think for everyone that is going through obvious, real trial this year, for me to write, I have to feel free in my head. And in order to feel free, I need to have some measure of hope. And the minute I got any hope at all, I felt creative again. And the inspiration leading directly into writing the book was I was thinking about writing a story. I had written 5 earlier novels that never got published. They are in a drawer somewhere upstairs. But I was thinking of writing a story about a group of people that come together and try and save like an old British house. And then I went to my first Jane Austen Society conference ever in Philadelphia for my 50th birthday with my daughter. And it was Professor Juliet Wells from Goucher College was there. Whit Stillman, the film director, is one of my favorites. And they were talking about grief and persuasion. And I came home from this trip, and I realized that I was in a state of anticipatory grief. I hadn't really processed it. And I started thinking about how grief runs through so many of Jane Austen's books. Like often the triggering event for the action is the loss of a parent. And so I was thinking of Sense and Sensibility, and then the testamentary property issues, and impoverishment for women through the death of the male provider, et cetera, in those times. And I remember coming back from this Jane Austen Society conference meeting and just looked at my family, and I had a light bulb moment. I really did, Stephanie. And I went, oh no, I'm gonna write about a group of people that come together to save Jane Austen's house. And I knew right away there would be 8 to 10 characters. In fact, I wrote them down on this piece of paper. So I don't know if you can see that because of the light, but so I wrote it down, and then I wrote down like the different jobs. And some of them didn't make the cut. Historian, journalist. And there were some that weren't conceived of yet, like the servant girl. And I wanted to reclaim the male fandom historically for Jane Austen as well with my book. So to tie up my very long answer to your question, I wanted to have half the group be male and half to be female. And I sat down and I just let it all come to me. I don't outline our plot, and the characters would just show up. And that's how it happened. So I never sat back and said, it has to be an auctioneer or there has to be a servant girl. But I did know I wanted to have a doctor and a lawyer because I'm a career coach and a former lawyer myself. And I love professional, ethical kind of quagmires. So I wanted to explore that a little bit too. So I all got in there. It's like a big soup of, different things.
You do have it in there. That is something about their professions that it does create, again, not going to go into spoilers, but there's some conflict of interest, which provides tension. But I think what it does is, even with a conflict, these people are so trustworthy that you know that they're going to do the right thing.
Which is very Jane Austen like.
Yes.
Which is the thing I love about Jane Austen, is that sort of safe suspense. Like the good people are pretty much going to get what they truly deserve, and the bad people will get a version of, maybe they think it's a great life, but they generally will get their due as well. And I wanted that to also be a theme in my book, about being true to yourself and having it work out, and be hopeful for that.
Yeah, and being honorable. So, and sometimes it's hard to find that sense of honor in this day and age. So it's really nice to read it in a fresh book. So thank you for that. Yeah. So So this really is, this book has so many layers because it is a historical fiction, which, I mean, you could have written this book without a Jane Austen Society existing, or the Chawton House Museum existing. That could be fiction, you know, because it does exist separate, where you just, you use this plot, but then developed it completely separate from history. So you have this story of these fictional characters, it feels very real. These separate people who have such different lives. But then you have this element of Jane running through, and this is very true. Her everything that you talk about with Jane Austen, her referring to her books, all the references, all the arguments, the discussions. I think that's one thing that's just so lovely about this. You really feel like you're among friends talking about Jane Austen. The points that are made are very real about her books. And there's such unique arguments that I don't think I've heard elsewhere. So it's almost like reading a critique, but it's couched in this fun, really moving story. But so it's half these fictional characters and half Jane Austen. So where does Jane Austen come into your life? Why Jane? And clearly you're a huge fan. And where did that come from?
Yeah, I was just looking to see if I had the book right here.
I'm sure.
I don't, but my parents had, like, you know, the fancy books that you weren't allowed to touch. So I grew up in the 70s. So there was like the Encyclopedia Britannica you were allowed to touch for school projects and like volcanoes and, you know, whatever. But then there were these nice books, and there was one in a box, and it was Pride and Prejudice. And I'd never seen a book in a box before. So, you know, like the Folio Society ones where they have the outer box. So I pulled the book out. And my mother was always like, don't go near those books. And like, I was like, I'm going to go inside this book. So I'm 9 years old and I open up this book and I start reading it. And right away, I don't know why, but her voice just synchronized with the way that my voice is in my head. And I've had other people tell me this, and a lot of lawyers especially gravitate towards Jane Austen. So I think there is something very inherently logical and linear and propulsive about her prose that responds to the lawyer's persuasive kind of, you know, brain. And I remember starting to read it, and Mr. Bennett's like ignoring Mrs. Bennett. She's like, have you heard? And he's like, yeah, whatever. And I was like, oh my God, these are my parents. Like, what are they doing in this book? And then I was thinking, wait, no, this is like everybody's parents. And I remember wanting to read because these characters just right away seemed really relatable to me. I was really surprised. And I remember she would spell choose differently, you know, with just a U instead of 2 O's, or I think ankles. There's a couple words that I liked that exoticism as a child. And I was kind of a precocious reader anyways. So I read her very young. And I think she really resonated with me on a syntax level. And I think I loved the romance, the justice, and the wide variety of human nature on display. I love seeing these recognizable human beings in her books. And yet I felt as if I was escaping my own life. That's why there's a line in my book about how she acts as a tonic. And, you know, you're allowed to go into this world and you just get just enough escape to energize yourself before you return to ours. And I think that's one of the reasons she's really resonating with people during this horrible time as well. So I just always found her as someone, you know, that I want to turn to at different stages in life, difficult times, happy times. I think I was reading Emma on a beach in Mexico when I met my husband 25 years ago, you know, things like this. She was always a part of my life. But now I'm in my 50s. And I think, you know, I'm looking at the screen and realizing there's a lot of women of different ages watching right now. And I think for women in particular, Jane Austen resonates with you, different books at different times. She's this living organism, and she continues to kind of expand in your life. And I say this, I always get emotional when I say this one thing, which is that I felt like she was waiting for me to catch up to her. So when my husband gets diagnosed with this incurable terminal illness, and we're told he might only have a couple of years, and it throws our life into disarray, I remember when I turned to her at that time, I was getting things from her for this new stage in my life that I'd never thought of or processed before. And when you mentioned that some of the insights that I share through my characters in my book, in a way, I was seeing things for the first time myself. But I was turtling a bit from everyone because we were in a really hard place in life. A lot was going on, and I wasn't out and about as much. And I think that with this book, I wanted to write because I wanted to create characters with whom I could interrogate her texts and share my thoughts and have these conversations. So it is a very odd thing to talk about out loud. I only realized I do these events, several a week, and I only realized, I think after a few months of talking, that I had basically created my own society for myself. So.
That's fascinating. Again, for those of you who haven't read this, interspersed throughout the entire book are just these just nuggets, gold nuggets of Jane insight. It's just amazing. I'm seriously, things that I haven't really considered. I think one of my favorite was comparing Harriet Smith and Knightley, and how they reveal, and we all know that Emma is a mystery, and how they reveal similarities. I mean, I never would have come to that realization without you. So it was really fun having friends on the page discussing this in front of me, because I learned something new, totally different point of view. So so that was a treat. And there are treats like that throughout. And they're very poignant, very interesting points made throughout. So from the different characters' points of view, and then it reveals not only something new about Jane Austen's characters, but something new about the characters who are speaking. So, I mean, it's just so many layers.
And it was interesting because, can you hear me okay? Sorry, I had a bit of background.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I hadn't intended that the characters in my book would have any intentional parallels with Jane Austen's characters. So when I first start to write, I just know I'm going to write about a group of people coming together to save her house, half men and half women. And I start to write. And the first image that comes to mind is of a farmer on a stone wall. And he's a lonely, sad, introverted, lost soul. And I remember lying on that same stone wall when I had made my little trip to Chawton the fall before. So in that moment, I was channeling sort of my emotional landscape a little bit. And then I have the stranger come to town, who's going to turn out to be another, a character in the book, different than what she is at this point, because 12 years will go by. But I remember writing the line that unlocked the plot for me, which is near the end of chapter 1, which I wrote in one go. And he was getting worried for Mr. Darcy. And I remember the moment I wrote that line, I went, oh, wait, this isn't just about a house. And this is about learning to love yourself and care again and love again and to love others. And finding, at the end of the war, I said it on purpose at the end of the war because I wanted the trauma to just be kind of just starting to be behind you a little bit. So that your challenge was, how do I trust again, engage again? The very challenges I was going through in life. And I wanted to explore that with my characters. But I remember I was writing a couple on a bench and they just show up on the bench. I created a earlier scene for them later where they meet in a church. But at this point, they're on a bench and they're talking about Emma and they're bantering. And I picked up on a real attraction between them. And there's an age difference, which at the time was much longer than it ended up being. I think it originally was like 30 years or something nuts. And I was like, wait a minute, there's something going on between these two characters. And then I thought, age difference, it's socially inappropriate for them to think about each other. I went, oh, it's like Emma and Knightley. And then that was it. And that unlocked the other part of the book for me. And then I had a lot of fun, Stephanie, was plugging those little like hidden treats and Easter eggs and things into the text. Then I went nuts. Then I was naming the dog Dixon. And I was doing everything. If someone falls down steps, I started throwing it all in there. But at the very beginning, I hadn't intended it. So it was really fun.
Well, it flows very naturally, so it doesn't seem contrived, it doesn't seem like you're trying to pack it in.
Yeah.
It's balanced very well. And it actually took me a while to catch on if there were any connections, intentional or otherwise. But I mean, keep in mind, we admire Jane Austen's characters because we find similarities in other people or ourselves. And so it would make sense that your fictional characters as humans would resemble
Yeah.
her characters. So I mean, it makes perfect sense. So, pardon me. I have to say, it's a delightful book and it's very entertaining to read. And there's some laugh out loud moments. I have exclamation points by several lines, which are hilarious, but so much of the book, as you pointed out a little bit, I think each of the characters comes from a place of trauma. And it's something that's woven throughout the book. And I think you already mentioned that there's this message of hope for them. But so I wonder if that's one reason why, I mean, this book has been such a success this year. It's so timely. But I believe, you wrote it a few years ago. Is this right? It seems so relevant for this year, even though it takes place mainly in 1945. But it just is it's what we need this year.
Well, I mean, it's funny because I wrote this book when my husband, we were very worried about his lung health. And I wrote this book to deal with that, not knowing that when it came out, when it got released, that the world would be worried about, everyone's lung health. And it's been a very odd emotional experience, is that because of my husband being extremely as high risk as you can be, and we haven't left our house since March, the oddest part of this experience for me has been having the blessing of this book and the ability to connect with people like this all the time. So writing a book to cope with his lung disease, and then having to stay inside because of a global pandemic when your book comes out, and then being able to connect with people because of the book that you wrote. Like it's very circular, and it feels very fated. And I don't actually believe in fate, but I do believe that the more you put out there and the more you might get back. And that was the message that I tried to convey, especially with the character of Adam, which is that, like, sometimes all you have is hope, but hope can be enough, that can be just enough to keep going. And that's really the through line of my book.
Adam is he's very sad and so beautifully written. He's just such a lovely, lovely person. How he's such a gentleman, and how he treats those in his village, everybody around him. He's a beautiful man. I really adore Adam. I'm so glad you wrote him. I haven't thought of this question until now. What do you think Jane Austen would think of all this? What do you think she would think of you weaving her characters in with your book, and what would she think about your characters? Who do you think would be her favorite character?
Oh, I think she'd really I think she would like Adeline. I think she would like Adeline's feistiness and spunkiness. It was interesting. When my book came out, I was interviewed by the Canadian broadcast company's radio station. And the interviewer asking the question, she was the first one and you're the second to ask the question, is like, what would Jane Austen think of your book? And have you thought about it? And I hadn't ever thought about it. And I've tried not to since she asked me, but here I go again. I think that Jane Austen was incredibly professional and a very motivated and ambitious writer, especially for her time. And I think that she was a very mentor. She really mentored a lot of her family. And I wonder sometimes how much she did that because she genuinely, wanted to help people, and also had this really strong sense of familial obligation and duty and support. She's very big, I believe, on helping each other and lifting others up. And you could see that in her books through her treatment of community. So I think she would always be, I would hope, happy for someone who is able to use literature. But in terms of, to improve their lot, but in terms of using her characters, I don't want to think about that. I was just like, that's a hard one, because I don't know how I would feel, because there is an artist's ego as well.
Okay, I have to say in your defense, I disagree. I don't think she would dislike it at all. Think of Northanger Abbey.
Yeah.
Think of Catherine Morland.
Yeah.
And Isabella, and what authors and books meant to them.
Yeah.
I think you're just taking that and just turning it towards her story. I don't think there's any disrespect at all, and I think it's honoring it and providing again, fresh insight. And again, these characters are honorable, and family is important, village life, and everyone supports one another, and I mean that sense of community is, I mean, people make very big decisions based on it, and it's life changing, life altering, and I think she would be tickled. I do. I think it would be a lot of fun. So I'm sorry if I answered an uncomfortable question. I'll try to do something fun next. Well, I guess that brings me to did you discover anything new about Jane Austen as you were writing? How much did you try to do a lot of research for this, or did you try to stay away from the research?
I did both. I spent a whole year reading her books in order, and then reading everything I could find about her without knowing I was going to write a book. When I did sit down to write, I didn't look back at the research. I tried to let it whisper in my ear a bit. And then when I was done the first draft and I was getting traction with agents in New York, I started to kind of go more rigorously through it and make sure that reference you made, like I had the books, I knew where everything was. But while I was writing, I tried to just let the research now be an intuitive foundation almost for what was going to happen, because I really did want it to be, my own story, my own exploration of the themes and issues that I was thinking of. But one of the things that I learned about her life, and I believe that this is something that, I mean, I'm sure I knew it already, but again, I was catching up to her, and I was starting to understand a bit more what it's like about having uncertainty and being unsettled in your life, and how that can impact your creativity. So in realizing how going through a difficult medical diagnosis for my husband was impacting my own joie de vivre and my own sense of wanting to put myself out there and to create. And then the minute we got some stability, my ability to do that again, I really, really appreciated those silent 8 years for Jane when they had to leave her childhood home with her father's retirement and start moving between lodgings with her parents and sister. Then her father passes away. And now they're kind of dependent on the largesse of the male relatives in the family, living in Southampton and different places. And it's not until they are allowed to stay in this cottage in Chatham that belongs to her brother, who has inherited wealth through a different way, that she immediately pushes out in like a 6 or 7 year period, like revises and publishes, Sense and Sensibility, revises and publishes Pride and Prejudice, creates from scratch Mansfield Park, creates from scratch Emma, creates from scratch Persuasion. It's like bang, bang, bang. And I truly believe that having even marginal certainty, she didn't have huge financial certainty at this point, but she had a roof over her head, and she had family and friends around. And I think that was really something I hadn't appreciated before about her. And I saw in the chat someone asking about the finding of the kitchen grate in the cottage. And I want to roll back a little bit, Stephanie, to when you had asked about the historical fiction parallels, like as a book of historical fiction, taking, this house and this cottage that really exist, but then making up all the people. It was interesting because I love Chawton House and I love the Jane Austen House Museum. And I was aware of their history of their salvation and their salvaging over time. But when I wrote this book, because I was coming at it from my own emotional sort of challenges and journey, I wanted to be very liberated in discussing who saves history and how do you do that and who's the first to make the decision. I wanted to explore that as well as these emotional themes of coming out of trauma and engaging again with life. And as a former lawyer, I couldn't take the real founders of the society and attribute to any of them any emotional landscape at all. I just didn't think that would be fair. So I remember at the very beginning, Stephanie just saying, if I make it all up, I can't get into trouble. So I made everything up. And then the only things that are really real are the existence of these buildings. But what happened in real life was Dorothy Darnell was a local woman, and she's walking by the Chawton cottage, which had been turned into tenement flats over time. And she sees a piece of fireplace grate by the road. And she just has a light bulb moment herself. And she's like, what are we doing? Like, this could have belonged to the Austen family. Like, we need to do something about this. And she gathered together like a handful of people in her living room. And they incorporated the society, and they tried to raise money during the Second World War, just like my characters try to do. They post advertisements in the newspaper, like my characters try to do. But because of the war raging, they weren't able to raise the money. And it wasn't until 2 years after the war that a local gentleman who was a Jane Austen fan, T.E. Carpenter, had lost his son in battle and was grieving. And he bought the cottage for £3,000 and then donated it to the nation. And a trust was set up, which in conjunction with the society that had been formed 7 years earlier, were able to open the cottage as a museum 70 years ago last year in 1949. So what I tried to do was use the kind of arc of that as a springboard for my own imagination, but create a completely fictional treatment so that I wasn't interfering in some meaningful way with real history.
I have to say, yeah, because the Jane Austen Society is the name of your book, and the Jane Austen Society exists.
Yeah.
And I think it's just something that you have to do when reading fiction or when accepting another world like science fiction, fantasy. You just have to dive in and be in the world that you created for a while. I love at the end, you have a very respectful explanation of, how you did not use any real characters. You were very deliberate in choosing unique names, and these people do not resemble real people, even though they feel very real as characters. You did that very respectfully, and as a lawyer, I'm sure that we can trust that. I mean, this is it was very well done.
I've had tremendous support from Chawton House is having me do an event there in a few weeks again, and the Jane Austen Society, the Jane Austen House Museum is very supportful, and different chapters of Jasna have had me speak. So I've been very lucky that I think people have been able to see that there was 2 ways to do this. It was don't write the book, or write a non-fictional account of what actually happened, which has been done in Jasna, and other societies will have, documents that outline exactly how it was done. Or it was use this to create entertainment that will inspire and hopefully give people, a pleasant and enjoyable read and a distraction that resonates with me as a writer, and then hopefully share that with others. And to get to that point, I had to completely make it up, or I would have been restricted from doing that emotional exploration that got me to the book that you have. So you're right. It was all in or all out. It's
done very successfully. I have to say, it's convincing. I did attend the Jane Austen Society of North America general meeting, which was virtual this year. It was supposed to be in Cleveland. And I went into a breakout room, and we were supposed to discuss what we were reading. And one of the hosts actually said he was reading your book, and he said it was absolutely delightful. And then in the next breakout room, I was actually with somebody involved in Chawton House. So I was, it was very interesting. Again, about the success of your story, how realistic it seems. I was so looking forward. This is my collection of Jane Austen's letters. And I desperately tried to read that letter from that history that Evie found, dated on August 6th of 1816, and was so disappointed that it doesn't exist. But in your world that I was reading, that I was in, it was there, and I loved it. I just loved it. But I'm not going to say what it was about. But again, you created just such a realistic, I think because it has so many layers, so much depth to it. So again, a delight, true delight. And coming to this book, the Jane Austen Society, I was confused because I'm actually a member of the Jane Austen Society. We have a local chapter here in Sacramento, which I'll be the coordinator again starting in January. So it's just been interesting wearing the hats and adopting, the different worlds. So it's been fun. I know that so many people have questions that I hate to neglect them. If you're okay, maybe answering a few of them. I'm so pleased to hear that you have written more books, and I'm hoping that publishers will give them more attention now that you have such a success on your hands. But somebody actually asked how you turned from lawyering to lawyering.
Well, it's interesting. I think a lot of people that go to law school are often in love with language and the written word. And I mean, if I could have been a writer from the time I was 9, I would have wanted to do that. But it does feel like a bit of a lottery. And sure enough, it was, because when I did seriously try to get published, it took 20 years. So for some of us, it's going to take a long time. And I went to law school and left the practice in my 3rd year, actually, and went into legal recruiting and consulting. So I was always working with lawyers, and I was really a career coach for the past 20 some years. So I got to hear a lot of great stories, and I only reinforced for me the importance of narrative and storytelling in our lives. In my late 40s, I made one more segue in my career that leads to this book, which is I opened up my own little independent bookshop up in the town where I live. And I opened it, unfortunately, 4 months before my husband was diagnosed. So we had to close it down pretty quickly. And it was pretty difficult. However, it did show me what people love to read. And as you work in the library will know, you do see a lot of what really energizes people as readers and spreads, like wildfire. And historical fiction was very successful in my bookstore in the year that I had it. Amazing books like All the Light We Cannot See and The Nightingale. And so I remember when I did decide I would try and write again after a 10-year break, I think all those different experiences came to the fore. So being a career coach, having a bookshop, and having been a lawyer. And I think being a lawyer, interestingly, I studied English literature in undergrad, but I think being a lawyer has actually been one of the key sort of formative influences on my discipline to my craft. So that I write, when I do write a book, I write every day, and I write 2,000 words every day for 6 weeks. And that's my first draft. And, I edit while I write. So I don't move forward until I'm happy with what I've written. I'm very diligent that way. And I believe that compulsiveness I share with Evie, my character, but it's also very much an Andrew Lawyer kind of quality as well. So it's something that I think law is a great training for showing you the importance of every word. And the importance of distilling difficult concepts in a way that is very not only understandable, but persuasive. and how the misplacement of a comma or, you know, a clause being moved around could change the whole import or interpretation of legislation. These are things that you really see up close in law school. And in a weird way, it's like being the business side of a poet. You do see every word in itself as its own vehicle. And I bring to every word in my book that level of, does this word need to be there? Is there a better word? Is this constant while I'm writing, I'm making those decisions? And that's my legal training. So.
Well, it works. I don't want to use the word polished because it's natural and it's realistic, but it is beautifully written and very, very successful. So I'm glad you had that life behind you to bring to this, because it really worked. And now only one of the characters is, well, I guess Adeline is relatively young, but you know, Evie is very young. But a lot of this is about people having a life behind them and also looking forward to a life ahead. And so maybe you're bringing that to each of these characters as well. So we know you love Jane Austen, that's clear. Are there other authors that inspire you?
Yes, I very much love the writers who sort of probe the disconnect between our exterior social selves and our inner world. So I really love Henry James. I love Edith Wharton. I love Virginia Woolf. I love George Eliot. I love the humanity of George Eliot. I aspire to the humanity of George Eliot. I just think she's just the kindest writer that ever lived. And I love from in modern times. And I love E.M. Forster. He's a huge influence on me as well. For modern writers, I was just reading a great collection of essays called Kitchen Yarn by Anne Hood. And she mentions Laurie Colwin. And Laurie Colwin is an American author who is very kind of not discoursed very much about. And she's just a genius descendant of Jane Austen, and I would urge everybody that, you know, to try and read either some of her short stories or Happy All the Time, for example. Like Eleanor Lippman as well. I love Susan Minot, Kazuo Ishiguro, Ian McEwan, Paul Auster. There's a lot of those are just some of the names off the top of my head. So
Absolutely.
Elizabeth Strout. I love Elizabeth Strout. Curtis Sittenfeld. Yeah.
I think you probably had some very lucky customers who came into your bookshop. I can imagine just lots of great recommendations. Absolutely. I agree. George Eliot, we read Middlemarch a couple of years ago and it blew me away. So I'm very pleased to hear that. Yeah. So much insight into characters. So, somebody's asking about your writing style here. The characters each have such separate stories. What was your process? Did the pieces move around? There are 8 characters.
Yeah.
So now one thing I have to say, at least in the beginning, I really loved how it's like looking, I don't want to say a cubist painting, but we have one scene with a couple people and then we have another character overhearing these people. And so it's this great way to move around in this 3-dimensional world. That's just one way to handle these different stories. But how did you keep them together? Were you able to move them around a lot, or did they, when your characters came to you and your stories came to you, did they just fall into place?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's hard to talk about because it sounds very like voodoo-ish, but I feel when I write, I feel like I'm looking through a camera at a film that's unfolding in another part of my brain. So if you think about my book, usually at the beginning of the chapter, there'll be a character and like there's another character looking down at them. Well, that's me. And then it becomes another character because I'm like, well, who else could be looking down at them? So Adam, it's, Marianne's looking down at him. Or in the chapter with Dr. Gray and Adeline on the bench, Francis is looking down at them through that window. Well, I've looked through that same window, but I look at my characters, I look down on them. Whereas my friend Bianca Murray, another author in Canada, South African author as well, she actually says she has the same experience where they just come to her, but she's looking through, out through their eyes at the world. But I'm always looking down, which is very Austenian as well, which leads to a lot of free and direct discourse in the writing style. So you have your omniscient voice, and then you're going into different people's heads strategically at certain times in order to create wit or to create comparisons or meaning. So I look down at the characters and I see them. And when I see them, I see everything about them. And I write word by word, brick by brick, chapter after chapter in order. And halfway through, I give it to my husband. And that's his chance to just go, no, babe, stop. It's just like, do not do this. And if he doesn't do it, I just keep going until I'm done. And that's how I write my books. Again, a very compulsive, very EV, very linear, but it seems to work. And I don't have storyboards. I don't have a difficulty keeping it. Everything has come to me. So I don't know why I'm just able to hold it inside me very easily. It feels very organic. It's all happening for a reason.
So a lot of times when I'm reading, I love marginalia. So I really wanted to keep your book clean. And then I had all these sticky notes. And finally I just got a pen and started writing and then went back. And sometimes I have to say what's happening, who's speaking, but I always knew who was speaking.
Yeah.
The voices are very clear. You know who this is. You know that character. And so it was really, really clear. Now you did mention something that I'm curious about. I had the fortune of also listening to the book, and the narrator is a male voice.
Yeah.
And I before I listened to it, I actually asked my question, now who's saying this? Sometimes I wonder when there is a comment by the narrator, is this Natalie Jenner? Or is this the book's narrator? Who is this? So who is our narrator?
So it's similar to Jane Austen that way. And I think because I had been reading so much of her, I was absorbing from her that sense that sometimes the irony or the wit or the thematic relevance is coming from the fact that you don't know for sure, but I always know who it is. So I always know when it's me imposing my personal take on something. I would say the narrative voice is most often, like I said, this sort of camera that I'm looking through. So it's somewhat removed from me and it comes to me. It is me, but it's also feels separate from me. And I think Jane Austen kind of, wrote in a similar way. So really, I'm cognizant of time, but I have a great story about the audiobook narrator. It's like, so
He has a lovely voice, very beautiful, and he switches characters very well, very convincingly.
So did you know him before you, have you seen his movies and shows?
I don't recognize who it is.
So there was an Elizabeth Gaskell book called North and South that was made into a BBC production, and he plays John Thornton. And I love that book and that series. So when I wrote my book, I had watched the series in the car with my daughter on the way to Virginia to visit one of her friends. And we watched it on a little DVD player at the time. And he was the voice of Dr. Gray, the actual actor that does the audiobook. As I wrote Dr. Gray, I could hear Richard Armitage's incredible, wonderful, deep, emotive, resonant, sexy voice. And I remember, especially when I wrote Dr. Gray, that I could kind of feel him. So when they gave me the list of audiobook narrators from Mac Audio, they said it was all women. And I was like, well, we thought about doing a guy. And they're like, well, who do you have in mind? And I was feeling really, really cocky at this point. I was like, just, Richard Armitage maybe. And we all looked him up, and he had done Georgette Heyer. He had done Regency romance audiobooks, but he had also done The Stranger on Netflix that came out at like a year ago, and he'd also done The Tattooist of Auschwitz. Like, he had done other audiobooks, and he's really well regarded. So they reached out to him, and I was actually in California. I was in Santa Monica. I had just gone to a Jasna Southwest meeting a year ago, and I knew he was recording the audiobook in London, and my Twitter blows up because he messages me like on Twitter and says, can you send me a DM, follow me and send me a DM, Natalie Jenner. And I was like, so I messaged him, and he just said, like, I just adore your book and I adore Dr. Gray. And I'm like, well, I've got a story for you. So it was very fun, and really, again, another very kind of karmic aspect of the story.
It's about having hope.
Yeah, and aiming a little high sometimes, shooting for the moon, but doing it.
Yeah, you're not going to get it if you don't ask for it. See, that's something we learned in this book. Sometimes you just have to put it out there.
Absolutely.
Good. Yes. So it's available through our catalog, so you can listen to it too. I'm going to return my copy after this. There is a lovely interview at the end, so I like that little extra surprise at the end. So that was fun. So somebody has asked if you have another book in the works. You say that you write 2,000 words a day.
Yeah.
So
I don't write every day. I'm not that compulsive. I write when I feel like it, because when I write, I go into a Louise Mal Alcott vortex where all I do is write my book. And I have, dogs and a kid and, other stuff going on. So what I do is I wait till an idea comes to me that I just can't ignore. And then I kind of wait until I know I've got a good, clear couple of months. So this summer, when my events started to kind of calm down a little bit, around the middle of July, I started and finished in September the first draft. And then I've been working very hard this fall on revising it with my agent, but it actually confidentially has been sold to my publisher already. So it'll be coming out sometime in 2022. And again, confidentially, just because there hasn't been a public announcement yet, it's going to continue the story of Evie, the servant girl, after she graduates from Cambridge. It takes place in a bookshop in London in 1950. And it involves these Evie and the women at this bookstore run by men. And they're going to perform a coup and try and take the bookstore over. So it was so much fun to write, and I'm working on it now very aggressively in edits. Just really excited about it, and excited that it takes place in a bookstore. It's really fun.
Those of you who have not met Evie yet, she's delightful.
Yeah.
She is. Yes. Adeline has lots of wonderful things to say about her, and she's a fun one. So I'm glad that we get to continue on with her story. Now, because in particular, I really adored the little tidbits about Jane Austen's characters woven throughout your books. Do you, I don't know, at this point, do you consider yourself an Austen, you seem to have a really unique point of view. Would you be comfortable writing some criticism or some nonfiction about Austen? I'd love to hear more. I really would.
Yes, I am by no means academically trained with regard to Austen. So I'm very self-taught. And I think I love the movies and the books and all the popular culture around her, as well as the real history and all of the more academic texts that I've read. So I think that what I've tried to do is, in some of the essays that I've written, I wrote one on why we keep filming Jane Austen, for example, for Pace magazine. And I've also recently been asked to write the introduction to a reissue of one of her books. So I do that work gladly and humbly, realizing that I don't have that academic, underpinning or strength, but I'm just a fan. And I very much try to just imbue any nonfiction writing I write with why we love her. And so I may not have, the sort of the type of insight that I wish I had, but I have the love and I love sharing that. And so I do try very much to do the nonfiction writing when I'm asked, when I can.
Well, I mean, the reader response criticism is just as valid as any. And this is one thing we love about Jane Austen. You don't have to be an academic. She didn't write for academics. She wrote for readers. And that's what each of us are. And so just hearing that, it is not necessarily an academic point of view, but just, I mean, it's all about her characters and their human qualities. And it's a very human response to them. So I think that's why it's particularly delightful. Again, for those of you who haven't read this yet, but who will, you're so going to enjoy being parts of these conversations interspersed throughout. I think they're just so much fun and really insightful. And I seriously, I can't wait to pick up Pride and Prejudice again. Adam really understands Mr. Darcy, and so I want to feel what Adam felt. And while he did pick it up for the first time, and it's always fun to know people are doing that, that's one thing about Jane Austen is throughout your life, each time you pick it up, you're in a different point. Things have happened to you, and you've grown as a person, and it's really interesting to have that new perspective each time you pick one up. And don't you love how you can go back and remember where you were sitting, what was going on in your life at the time that you read it at certain points, because it really does resonate. It bounces off of your life.
I mean, I think the one of the last things I would say about why she appeals to us as readers is that I think she has created a world that is so focused on the personal and the social, and she doesn't overly describe the political, the historical, the socioeconomical issues that were going on in society. She's really focused on the people, and I think that allows us to project into her text. I think it allows us to see ourselves in those characters, and to see our neighbors and family and friends. But I think it also, like, again, it acts as an escape, but it does allow us to kind of work through things. So, when I was growing up, I didn't know that these books were really about money. I mean, I didn't really think about it in those terms because money wasn't a life concern for me yet. I needed an allowance, and I needed money, but I didn't need money. I mean, I had parents taking care of me still. But then later in life, when you run into financial challenges, et cetera, and you start to realize how much that lack of money can affect decision-making and hope. And so this is what I feel she gives us, is a way for us still to work through things that can be complex and difficult, or choose not to. Sometimes you can just go to her books and have the distraction of being in this very different world.
Sorry, I think my dog wants to be a part of this conversation. That is an interesting point that you make. I think it's especially clear about, all you have to do is think about the Bennets, Mrs. Bennet. And as a young reader, imagine how embarrassing those parents are.
Yeah.
And how Mrs. Bennet seems to have a one-track mind. But then if you change your perspective to a parent who is worrying about their children, and their security and safety and livelihood for the rest of their lives, that really puts a different perspective on it. And so that's what we can do. I think it might be why some of us have Pride and Prejudice is a great introduction, because you can you have that youthful perspective and you have the feisty Lizzie, but then so many of us end with Persuasion and can really relate to that maturity persuasion. But I think, I don't know, all of these pop up so much. Fanny Price a little in your book. I think I see her in there a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, you pretty much give everybody equal space, I think, on your pages.
I love them all. I mean, I think we all love all her characters. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that we keep reading her, is because I think no author ever loved her characters more than Jane Austen. I mean, I loved my characters so much. And one of the reasons I wrote the epilogue is because I just needed to kind of know they were going to be okay. And I was really besotted with all of them. And I think Jane Austen was the same way. And I think one way we know that is that in her letters, which are so interesting and fascinating to me, there is reference made historically, and I can't remember how we know it, but she, I think, writes to Cassandra that she is somewhere in a gallery and she's going, you know, she's like, I wonder if I'll see my Lizzie, you know, on the wall, you know, in the paintings. And I realized, oh man, does she love Elizabeth Bennet? It's like, I love Elizabeth Bennet so much. And I was like, I think Jane Austen loved Elizabeth Bennet the way we all do, like just thought she was just the bee's knees. And I really think that humanity comes through with her characters and her writing. And I think that's why they're so alive.
And that's something that you say in your book, is about loving, you know, warts and all, you know, loving even despite. Faults. And you know, it's something we know about Emma, that Jane Austen loved Emma, and she said, I don't think anybody else is going to like her, but I love her. And this is about loving even with, you know, taking the bad with the good, and just loving through and through.
Yeah.
So it's a great way to approach life. Well, I think you've been so generous with your time.
Thank you so much.
I hope that we've answered the burning questions of our guests. Again, you can read the book again and again and learn a lot more about it each time, as I have done. The audio version is a delight. It's narrated so beautifully, and again, there's a treat at the end, so you might learn a little more that way. We're so happy for you, and happy that we get to read more. Coming up, we won't tell the secret, but it's such a delight. I'm so happy to know, and I will definitely be one of the first in line to read more about Evie's. She was a real favorite. So thank you so much for joining us. Yes,
thank you,
2020 has been a challenge, but I think, boy, talk about good timing. We needed this year. So thank you for making this little corner of the world accessible to us, and for bringing these characters into our lives. They're truly special.
Thank you so much, everyone, and happy holidays, and wherever you are, please stay safe. And I'm just very grateful to have this time. And I guess the last thing I'd say is a very small portion of my UK proceeds have been going to Chawton House. And I would just urge everyone to think about both these institutions being so impacted by the lack of foot traffic. They depend totally on tourism for their survival, and you know, anything that people can give to the North American Friends of Chawton House or directly Jane Austen's House Museum would just be so greatly appreciated right now to help us get through to 2021, and I think much better times ahead. So thank you all, and now I will leave because it's something very exciting coming up.
That was awesome.
Thank you all, and stay healthy, stay strong. It's gotta get better soon.
We can do it. We can do it together apart.
That's right.